All right, well, on to the Gaza story now, where one Palestinian has been killed, 10 teenagers injured in the Israeli-Gaza border after Israeli soldiers opened fire at farmers who reportedly entered a no-go zone. Now, IDF sources say that several riots took place near the border, so warning shots were fired into the air in order to disperse the crowds. It comes on the second day of the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Well, journalist and activist Harry Fear is currently working in Gaza. Let's turn to him now for an update on the latest. Well, look, we're already hearing reports of theoretically some sort of confrontations on the border. Is this an indication that the truce can perhaps not hold?
Well, yesterday we received reports that 4 Palestinians had been injured as a group of children went to a jeep, an Israeli jeep that had been blown up by resistance groups over the last while. Today we received this report that 8 to 10 Palestinians have been injured and one critically injured, so as he's been killed, a 20-year-old man from the Khan Yunis area. Khan Yunis being about 2/3 of the way down the Gaza Strip, bordering with Israel. Now, under the ceasefire, most Gazans see that the no-go military buffer zone, which Israel had imposed on Palestinian territory, on the Palestinian side of the border, had been erased, and that the farmers in that area whose land had been taken away, they would now be able to farm that. So this morning, groups of Palestinians went to what they thought was now again their Palestinian territory to look at this Israeli jeep which is rusting away. And we've learned that, as you say, one Palestinian has been killed in that incident. We're now getting reports that there are protests following that in the area. Now, I think looking at the situation politically on both sides of the border, I don't think that even though this 20-year-old man has been killed, that the ceasefire will break. It's not in the interest of the state of Israel. It's not in the interest of Hamas here locally. And I think this is going to be one of the most gravest tragedies of these last couple of weeks.
Well, certainly a tragedy indeed. But you mentioned protests there. Other than that, the airstrikes have, of course, stopped. Are people sort of managing to get their lives back to normal? What are you seeing on the ground since you're there?
Well, it was wonderful. As soon as the celebrations erupted the night of the ceasefire, life has actually gone back to normal to an extent here. The schools are reopening and etc. Today is actually a day of rest. It's an Islamic holy day. But generally speaking, the streets are full again. Children are out again. People's shops are opening again. And life is going back to normal so quickly after the ceasefire was announced. So that's a very nice thing for us to see here as internationals, the Gazans' life going back to some sort of normalcy. Well, but of course, we've had so many injured, over 1,000. We've had over 160 Palestinians killed. And remember that more is still being killed because they're dying of the injuries that they were inflicted on them during the 7-8 day war. So the body count is still rising, and the Ministry of Health here in Gaza and the World Health Organization still have not given us the latest figures of how many Palestinians were killed. And so the scars are very much on the ground, they're on the mind, and they're on the bodies of some Palestinians.
Well, you say that life is going back to normal, but of course normal in Gaza is under a very controversial blockade by Israel. And the one of the critical, I guess, obstacles to the peace agreement is the lifting of that blockade. That has still to be discussed. Do you think that there's any chance that we'll see the complete easing of those restrictions?
Yes, as you say, in the ceasefire, there's a particular line referring to this, that over these coming hours and days, there will be more detail given to this notion of the lifting of this siege blockade on the Gaza Strip. But I think people here in Gaza, according to my reading, are very, very skeptical about that actually being realized to 100% extent, that the blockade would totally be lifted. There have been 2 milestone easings of the blockade since it was first imposed, but they have been tiny in relative terms. I don't think people are expecting this ceasefire to manifest in a proper and real lifting of the blockade of the Gaza Strip.
All right. Well, certainly keeping us up to date on the situation on the ground there. That was journalist and activist Harry Fear, who's currently working in Gaza. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us.